CGTN headquarters in Beijing. This is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. On February the 1st, U.S. President Donald Trump said he would impose 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico and 10% on China effective immediately. Now, these tariffs were said to remain indefinitely, with potential increases if countries retaliated. However, just 2 days later, in a classic Trump reversal, the U.S. president announced that he would pause the tariffs for 30 days after Mexico and Canada agreed to take steps to tighten border security and drug trafficking. Now, this delay follows a tumultuous standoff that brought North America to the brink of a trade war, one that could have disrupted supply chains, driven up prices, and strained key economic partnerships. Now, Trump's last-minute move on tariffs still raises critical questions about the future of the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Will this temporary truce lead to long-term stability, or is it just a brief reprieve before another escalation? How will Trump's policy flip-flops affect the U.S. economy? What is the real intention behind Trump's using tariffs as a bargaining tool? Now let's explore these pressing issues with our distinguished panelists. For more on these topics, we're joined in Washington, D.C. by Sourabh Gupta, Head of Trade and Tech Program at the Institute of China-America Studies. In Tokyo, Japan, we have Benoît Hardy-Chartrand, Faculty Lecturer in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at the Temple University. And in Beijing, China, we have Einar Tangen, commentator on current affairs and the Senior Fellow of Taihe Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Sourabh, let me turn to you first. Initially threatening a 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and Canada being America's closest allies. And now, the pause of these tariffs for 30 days. What is the mood in Washington? How is Washington taking all these, statements and threats? And is Washington behind Trump's decisions?
Washington is more in wait and watch mode. Trump is disruptive personality. He's out to be doing things. There's a lot happening on the domestic front with regard to firing people. So Washington is anxious. Washington is nervous, and Washington is watching just exactly what Trump wants to do, because at the end of the day, this administration is essentially what Trump is going to do, and not everybody understands what exactly is going through his head at this point of time.
And then do people take issues with Trump's using tariffs as a quote-unquote eternal weapon for external tax revenue? We have memories of him using this as a weapon in 2017, 2018 during his first term in office. I mean, given the amount of intellectual depth in Washington or the think tanks, is Beltway behind Trump's decision to use tariffs as threats, as bargaining tips?
No, absolutely not. I think there's a very broad consensus out here that Trump is going down the wrong path. Let me say this, that the establishment itself has been diverted off its pro-liberalization moorings. It has become populist, it has become protectionist, but not to the extent that Mr. Trump wants to use tariffs, because it's seen as self-damaging at home. But at this point of time, Mr. Trump rules. He's the king of Washington, and at least the players whom he needs in his administration and in his party are willing to give him the benefit of doubt to do what he needs to do. But frankly, I think there are a lot of misgivings even among people very close to him with regard to how he is going about with his tariff stick.
Benoît, let me turn to you. You've been studying America's policies against other countries, Canada included. How do you take in Trump's policy threats against Canada and Prime Minister Trudeau's response? And now the two countries are apparently in a negotiation over a fentanyl export and a renewed trade agreement.
Right. Well, the first 2 weeks of the Trump administration and his approach to his allies, and especially Canada in this case, has been quite baffling, to be honest. The last few days, the last 3 days, well, since he announced the tariffs of 25% on all Canadian exports has done something that nobody else was able to do in Canada for years, which is to unite the whole political class of Canada. I've been, of course, an observer as a Canadian myself, an observer of the political scene there, and it's been extremely polarized over the last few years between the Conservatives, the Liberals, and other parties as well. And now we've seen the whole political class in Canada united against Trump. So that's quite an achievement by the American president. Now, this is going to have probably long-term, or at the very least, short and medium-term effects on the Canada-U.S. relations, because, as you mentioned early on yourself, Canada is one of the United States' closest ally, if not the closest ally. So implementing such a move is going to do a lot in terms of hurting the mutual trust that has been at the foundation of the bilateral relation. Diplomacy runs on trust. It runs on mutual feelings of benevolence, and that's not what we have seen from the Trump administration so far. And what's been even more baffling, I would say, is the justifications behind those tariffs. So already the previous guest was explaining that in Washington they're opposed, and economists are opposed to these tariffs, but Trump has talked about the necessity of those tariffs to curb fentanyl coming in from Canada, this devastating drug, and also to curb immigration coming from Canada. But according to Americans' their own data, fentanyl coming from Canada is less than 1% of their intake of fentanyl. Same thing for immigration; it's only a tiny percentage of all the immigration or illegal immigration coming from abroad. So therefore, even the justifications don't really stand on their head when it comes to looking at real world data. So I'm going to conclude just by saying that, the first 2 weeks have been quite baffling, and it doesn't look extremely promising for the 4 years of U.S.-Canada relations.
Yeah. Sometimes apparently the numbers don't add up. Thanks for the perspectives. Einar, why do you think Trump, took Canada and Mexico first, or should I say take on Canada and Mexico first, and then threatening the European Union at this point?
Well, I think he's trying to convince everybody, as he said before, that he's crazy. But I'm going to disagree with my colleagues a little bit. I think Trump is very transparent. He's a nativist. He's withdrawing from anything to do with the UN, anything to do with American responsibilities abroad. And that is going to continue. On a daily basis, he releases white rabbits and red herrings, and the press chases them. And, he has a very standard operating procedure. What he does is he does something shocking. Then he watches the television to see what the reaction is, and then he decides how he can make the best deal. He doesn't care about long-term consequences. Remember, he's going to, in 4 years, he's completely done. There's nothing left for him. So he's convinced that he can go down in U.S. history as the most forceful president since McKinley. He's even asked, there's a bill pending that is going to put him on the face of Mount Rushmore, something he asked for before. And don't forget, he still wants that Nobel Peace Prize.
Man, putting his face on the face of the Mount Rushmore, that sounds a little a bit of a narcissist, but
a little.
Let's bear with it. That's Trump, right? A little. What about China? As China watches all these things, as a China expert yourself, China is apparently in a more prepared and better prepared position than 8 years ago.
Okay, so I'm not a China expert. I've been here for 20 years, and I've observed differences between China and the U.S. Very clearly, China has been moving away. It's right now, it's 37% of its trade is GDP is related to exports, and only 15% of that 37% is related to the United States. So they're in a much better condition. But it's a situation where when somebody hits you, your temptation is to hit them back. But when a bully hits their closest friends, maybe it's time to say, well, maybe we should be, a little more forgiving. Why do we have to do it? Donald Trump is doing for China what China could never do for itself. He has turned international opinion against the United States. He's going to make China great.
Well, there's similar sayings and memes on Chinese social media about that. More about that later. Sourabh, you talk about the internal politics of Washington. Maybe you can elaborate on that. There are so many competing priorities during Trump 2.0, right? The newly set up Government of Efficiency, Department of Government Efficiency, border security is a big issue, police, national troops being deployed along the border, and now taking on Canada and Mexico, America's allies and partners. How does these tariffs position among Trump's priorities in his first 100 days in office?
Oh, I think it's very, very high. For Trump, it's tariffs and immigration are the two big issues. Other issues are secondary, whether it's AI or shutting down the Department of Education, et cetera, et cetera. Even expenditure control, I think, is a secondary issue for him. Tariffs is right front and center. And for him, from his standpoint, philosophically, he wants balanced. He doesn't want trade deficits. He wants countries to balance their trade. And if the country which has a trade deficit is essentially a loser. And what aggravates him even more is that when he is a loser with one of his allies who runs that huge trade surplus, in this case, Canada. He used to talk about this with regard to Japan in the 80s, how America was being double screwed, in his words. First, they run a huge trade surplus. On top of that, they plow all that surplus back into Manhattan and buy property. Here, Canada runs a huge trade surplus, and on top of that, they even get protection from the United States. So that's the mentality in Trump, and that's why he's moved so fast, so early, and it's on immigration and tariffs where he is going to be very, very focused.
And then on Mexico, the Mexican president promised some 10,000 troops deployed to Mexico's northern border to secure that border. Is that an initial triumph for Donald Trump when it comes to fencing and defending the very long border that he failed to defend completely during his first term in office?
To be frank, I've actually been taken aback a little bit. I thought the tariffs would actually be implemented, there would be countermeasures, and in the meantime, the negotiations would continue. In fact, he has kind of suspended them. So, the Donald himself is losing his own game a little bit. But I'm not surprised at what the Mexicans are doing. They're trying to do things which will because right now he's very focused. The issue is fentanyl trafficking and immigration, and so border control, and that's happening. That same conversation is happening with the Canadians in terms of a joint strike force with regard to these two issues. And so, but the point is here, this is going to be a seesaw process where it's not going to come to a nice final conclusion where, yes, the border issue got resolved and the tariffs got removed. The tariffs will stay at some point, will be implemented, will stay at some point of time. The border issue will be managed, that it will go up and down, court challenges, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to just get messy from here going forward. But we're seeing an early playbook in terms of how Mr. Trump wants to go about it, which is basically jerking people around and trying to use that leverage to his benefit.
Yeah, Benoît, help us understand the Canadian dynamics there. You said that between the left and the right there were confrontations and debates going on for years, and now they're kind of uniting against Donald Trump, their southern neighbor. How do they look at all Trump's threats? Making Canada America's 51st state, so on and so forth, and now tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Well, already before the announcement of the tariffs, before even his election, Donald Trump was not very popular in Canada. He was not very popular during his first term either. And this is based on multiple opinion polls that were conducted in Canada, which showed a vast majority of Canadians disapproving of Trump's policy. Even before the current elections, before his victory in November, polls show that it was something like 70 or 80% of Canadians who would have voted for Kamala Harris if they have a voice. So this is just to kind of illustrate basically this basic antipathy that a lot of Canadians feel toward Trump. Now, as you mentioned in your question, his repeated threats to annex Canada have been just another baffling change or aspect of his new policies. When he first mentioned that a few months ago, people thought it was a joke. People kind of laughed it off. People wondered why he was saying that, but I don't think people were taking that very seriously. But he has been repeating this mantra so often now for the last few months, this mantra of Canada being the 51st state. He has repeatedly mocked the Prime Minister, calling him the Governor of Canada instead of the Prime Minister of Canada. Once again, this is not the way that you treat a long-term ally. So this is one of the reasons why, as I mentioned earlier, the Canadian, not only population, but political class has united against the United States. But you see clearly that there is absolutely no desire for Canadians to even consider the possibility of annexing or of becoming the 51st state of the United States. One recent survey, actually more than a recent survey, showed that it's about 5% of Canadians that agree with that. But once again, where is that going to lead? Why is Trump continuing to talk about this possibility? And if he's willing to talk about Canada as a 51st state, what else is he willing to countenance? What else is he willing to consider? And that is, again, what is causing a lot of anxiety in Canada, because they're our biggest trading partner. They are extremely important to our prosperity. And now that we have a leader like this, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead for the next 4 years.
Yeah, one of the biggest trading partners anywhere in the world, and so is the European Union, Einar. Donald Trump, took on Denmark by threatening that Greenland would be, incorporated into the United States. In a recent meeting with the European leaders, Trump made that point again, and somehow the European leader acknowledged Trump's position and said something like, it could be discussed, of course, not being incorporated in the United States, but his position would be considered. That is crazy.
Yeah, I don't think if he was running for election again that he would be in the same position. But look, America is an empire. For the last 249 years, we have solved our problems by expanding. And this is exactly what Trump is doing. He's going back to the days of McKinley, where you just grab land and do it. And he's not just doing it in Europe. In Panama, he's pressuring them to get out of the Belt and Road Initiative. Look what he did to Colombia. He's setting up a pattern of what he intends to do. He wants to muscle people. He wants to be the playground bully, take other countries' lunch money, and then he'll be satisfied. But, there's really no secret about where he's going to go. Any country that has a trade surplus with the United States is going to be targeted. This is something that he feels he's entitled to do as a powerful country. Remember, Donald Trump's mantra is power is used to maintain your power and extract value.
Yeah. You would think that, 8 years ago when Trump made the first inauguration speech, when he said America first, he also hinted that it's going to be America alone, America only. But now there's a interventionist flavor in Trump's America first policy.
Well, this is all driven by victimization. And if you go back to the Weimar Republic, that period between World War I and World War II, you heard the same thing. People's expectations were down. They put their trust in populists who are doing it. And it was all driven on this entitlement, this victimization. Trump is all about that. So he's willing to push that as far as it goes. And there are a lot of people who feel let down in the American system, and they should. For 45 years, the U.S. has been going in reverse. It has not been this beacon on the hill. It is instead just slowly moved sideways. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Sourabh, about Trump's earlier statement about making America more exceptional. We need to clear this up because exceptionalism has at least two meanings, in my humble opinion. One is unique, right? Unique, excellent. The other meaning is it does things that, or it follows rules that it don't have to follow rules that other countries follow. It can be exceptional. It can be a unique case. Outlier. Doesn't need to abide by the rules and the laws. So when Trump made the assertion that he's going to make America more exceptional than it already is, what is your interpretation of that?
My interpretation is that Trump is talking in terms of, as you described, the first interpretation, where America is this shining entity on the top of the hill, shining star. But the process in which he is going about doing it is essentially what you talk, the second interpretation, which is breaking laws and going about anyway. You just think about it in terms of what he's doing to Canada and Mexico, straightforward violations of the USMCA agreement, the successor to NAFTA. His tariffs against China is a straightforward violation of the very first article of the World Trade Organization's multilateral trade rules. He doesn't observe and obey rules. He doesn't intend to do so. He intends to. He feels he can take America to make it great again. In his mind, he has particular ideas and images of what America are, and he'll do it no matter whichever way he needs to get there. That's Donald Trump. That's how he's going to do it.
Yeah, tell us a bit about your institute's research and projection on Trump's China policy, because your institute has been dedicated to studying China-U.S. relations for so many years. We talked about this when I was in Washington, having you on multiple times in our Washington studio. What is the sentiment there like these days when it comes to the policy circle of the Beltway, when it comes to what Trump's future policy vis-a-vis China would be like?
There's Donald Trump in the Trump administration, and then there is the Trump administration. Donald Trump can be managed by China up to a point. He is a known quantity. He wants to be disruptive and unpredictable, but there's a certain predictability to his unpredictableness, and that there are certain bargains which can be worked even with Donald Trump 2.0. We can talk about that if need be. The Trump administration, Republicans are extremely hardline on China, very anti-China, and look at it as a geostrategic enemy which needs to be encircled, contained, etc., etc. So we have these two different characters, two different entities operating within the same administration. Trump is not, at the end of the day, I know he's talking about Greenland, etc., and those ominous tones, but he is not a warmonger, and he prefers not to have to fight. He would rather have that all those transactions, people stoop and bend to him at the negotiation table. So that's how he is approaching China. He thinks he has the leverage. I don't think he's going to wake up to reality. And the danger really is that when he negotiates with China and then he fails in the negotiation, as he did in his negotiations with Kim Jong-un, in many of his negotiations with China during Trump 1 with the Europeans, the Trump administration, the hardliners, will then kick in with their policies on China, which will stand the test of time and stand the day, and then will stay as measures, anti-China measures, beyond the Trump administration. So we hope Trump can work out constructive bargains with China, but I'm not actually very confident in his deal-making skills, even though he calls himself this great deal-maker.
Yeah, well, wait and see. Thanks for that. Benoît, some countries, in response to Trump's tariff threats, are locating or relocating or re-identifying trading partners and forging new trade alliances, such as Singapore and Malaysia, for example. Many countries are looking to this Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone as a more reliable and predictable regional partner. How do you think Trump 2.0 administration would reshape global trade alliances?
I mean, it's quite likely that if he continues along the path of tariffs, which he seems intent to do, he seems willing to do, I think indeed this is going to provide further impetus for countries around the world, especially countries that have long-standing trading partnerships with the United States, to try to hedge their bets a little more and diversify their trading partners. We are seeing that in Canada. There's been, for a few years, Canadian senior officials have talked about diversifying our trade partners. Right now, about 70% of Canada's trade goes to the United States, so we're trying to bring that number a little bit further down. But other countries are going to do the same as well, and it remains to be seen if countries like Japan, for example, I've been based in Japan for a long time, it's one of the most important allies of the United States. Same thing for South Korea. These two countries are looking at the current situation and are wondering if Canada, if a close ally of the United States is treated as such, that it's quite likely that South Korea and Japan are going to be treated as such as well. And that might indeed further lead to changes in supply chains, in reconfigurations of different trade partnership, trade blocs around the world. And already, of course, as we all know, over the last few years, we've seen an increasing fracturing of the world. We have seen further divisions. We've seen supply chains disrupted, starting with the pandemic in 2020, and then further exacerbating with the launch of Russia's war against Ukraine, which has completely redesigned a lot of the energy markets around the world. So that may, what's going to happen over the next 4 years may simply add to that global trade instability and reconfiguration of partnerships that we have already been seeing for 4 years.
Yeah, I want to ask Einar the same question about what you said, Benoît, reconfiguration and reshuffle of global supply chains and trading patterns. What do you foresee to happen? What's your prediction coming the next 4 years?
Well, I agree with Benoît that you're going to continue to see this, but don't put it in a 4-year term. Put it in 2 years, because that's when a referendum on Donald Trump will be held in terms of the midterm elections. I forecast that he's going to lose those in a massive manner. He was elected by his base and people who held their nose. And remember, he has the lowest approval ratings of any president since 1954 when entering office. But they had faith that he was a businessman and that he could control prices. What is he doing? He's not controlling prices. For a lot of Americans, they like Canadians. The idea that they're banging on Canadians is completely astonishing to them. But remember, Donald Trump is vindictive. And you can see that. He fired every prosecutor who was involved in the cases against him, despite the fact that they're just civil servants doing their job. Yeah. And he was very well aware that Canada didn't like him. He was very well aware when Europe threw parties when he was not elected the last time. So he is out for revenge, and he's made no secret about it. He said he will do
what kind of revenge can we expect from Trump towards or vis-a-vis the European Union? He asked the European Union to step up their payment for their national defense, and now the trade is coming into the matrix.
Okay, so this idea of compartmentalization does not exist for Donald Trump. You use anything you can, the kitchen sink or a wrench or whatever, in order to get the deal done. He sees himself as, this kind of hard-charging, hard-bitten New York real estate guy who can get anything done. He's the art of the deal. So he will continue. But what is he actually doing? He's actually pushing Europe away. They now have to consider other arrangements because the U.S. is no longer a steadfast bastion of, the special relationship. And this is going to come as news to a lot of the European leadership who used to praise Donald Trump and say, we can work with him and things like that. And obviously, they can't.
Yeah. We pray for, more rationality. We pray that rationality would prevail. We need more integration. We don't need an iPhone on one hand and Huawei on the other. We don't need two tech standard, two systems. We don't need a DeepSeek and on one hand and then the ChatGPT on the other. And, either doesn't talk to each other. That would be a disaster for world trade and for all the users in the world. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We learned a lot. Thank you for your perspectives. And that will do it for this edition of The Hub on CGTN. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our news coverage continues. Bye and Happy New Year.